Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, as I've supported men in their love and work lives for 15 years now, many men ask for the right words to say to be more successful, attractive, and desirable. But I found it's not so simple as giving scripts or lines because every man is different. So giving words or scripts would be like giving a tall, thin man a shorter, wider man's pants, or vice versa. The words have to make sense for you and your personality, and there's so much happening beneath the surface that people are responding to. If you're interested in how to become a better lover and leader in your own unique way, go to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz, or you can text ALIVE to 44144. It only takes a couple minutes and you'll start to get an idea of how you can be both more respected and desired. After you fill it out, we can schedule a time to review your quiz and talk about your specific challenges and desires. So again, go to either shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text ALIVE to 44144. That's ALIVE to 44144. Enjoy this episode of Man Alive. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm your host, Shana James. So excited to be here today with Matt Barnes. Matt, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So we are going to talk today about the role of the dad and how it's changing over time, how technology is actually changing, the role of dad, and your specialty of education. And I feel really excited for, it's not always that we have a big shift in vision for a role that has been around as long as father, right?
Yes.
You know, and so to me, there's something really powerful about this. So yeah, what do you have to say in this moment?
Frankly, I like the way you phrase that, this shift of vision for an entire generation and an entire, one half of the species, right? So
that's big.
It is huge. And it's a tectonic shift, right? What we'll see from dads in 10 years won't look anything like what I went through with my own raising of my own kids. And I welcome it. I'm ready for it. And I'm so excited to kind of help promote it.
Wow.
It's really going to help kids.
That totally intrigued me. I'm like, wow, what is it?
So here's all right. So that my work is called the education game. Because when I think about education, I'm a sports guy. I've played all sorts of sports. And I kept seeing that the strategy involved with education parallel the strategy involved in like football, right? So there's a field of play in education. There's a time clock. There are referees, there's coaches, there's rules, there's competitors, there's spectators, and there's an objective. But the problem historically has been the objective is really small, right?
Yeah.
So the objective.
I've heard people say, right, we're still in an education model where we're educating our kids to be factory workers.
Oh my gosh. Yes. We are. This model was built in the early 1900s. And so the model is dead at this point, but we're still using it. And so all these, when you play a game, you can play it to win the trophy, or you can play it to build a person of high character.
Wow.
And if you think about the best coaches in the world, John Wooden's, those are folks that were like, I want to build character through this player more than anything else, because a person of high character is going to win.
Interesting. I'm not as much of a sports person, so I didn't actually know that there were coaches out there who that was their goal.
Yes. And those are usually the best coaches. If you talk to athletes, they will say the coach had such a meaningful influence on their life, not because they won or lost games, but because the coach was holding them to a higher standard. Wow. And that, now back to the role of dads in education, that is what's coming online right now. Education has shifted 180 degrees. Most people don't even realize it. Now I'm talking to you. I didn't even ask where you are right now. I mean, you could be across the globe and I wouldn't know the difference.
Yeah.
That is the new reality we're in. You can learn from anyone at any time,
anywhere,
on any topic, right?
Yes.
That is where we are. And so what is needed is not an institution that's going to say, okay, here's, the class you will take in the order of coursework. It is a decentralized learning model.
Wow.
And in any decentralized learning model, you got to have somebody that acts as the strategist, the chief.
I was going to say, because that sounds a little scary to just decentralize it all. It's like, who do we trust and how do we do that?
It's coming, whether we trust someone or not, or whether we know how to do it, it's coming.
Yes.
And the question here is who in the part of the family is going to play the role of the chief strategist? I mean, I talk about it as the head coach, right?
Yeah. Chief
Who's going to play
strategist, head
that role?
coach. Yep. Of the education.
Yep. And that means they're setting a vision. Like, who's the child I want to give to the world, right? It's not what grades do I want or class rank or SAT score. It's who's the person that I want to give to the world.
Which is beautiful. I remember you saying in our conversation before we started recording, you know, my kid is valedictorian of his, was it college?
Yeah. Of high school. No, it's high school.
And I don't care, which, you know, could be very controversial, but this is the point that you're making. It's who he is, not what he's accomplishing.
That's right. In fact, I sent a post out this morning on LinkedIn and said, I don't care that he's the valedictorian, and he doesn't care. What I care is that he is of incredibly high character. And again, if you have a kid or an adult who has really high character, it's going to be really hard for them to lose at anything. Yes. Character matters more.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. That feels good. My kid, as a 9-year-old, is very into winning and you know, making sure that there's is there a trophy or is there this or what do you get? We went to a baseball game the other day and, you know, a friend was playing baseball and Ari asked like, well, what do they get for winning? Do they get candy or do they get this or do they get that? And I was like, oh God, right. It's really in the psyche to work with.
Yeah. It's now, and again, I'm not suggesting that competition is bad. I think there's a place for it. It's just a matter of what's more important and what do we as parents really, really value.
Yeah.
So great point here. So check this out. So when you think about the typical dad who's standing on the sidelines of a football game or a basketball game, that's where dads tend to engage.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
And they're really they can be about either winning or they can be about effort.
Yeah.
Right. And if you take that and just change it from a basketball game to education, it's all about effort.
Yeah.
It's not about the result, right? If you work hard and you get a C, we really should be celebrating that. But if you don't work hard and get an A, that should not be anything that anyone celebrates. It's the same logic. So dads know how to do this.
Yeah.
Dad knows. They've seen a team that wins, but everybody on the team is just kind of not working hard.
Yeah.
Dads know that you don't celebrate that. Right? That trains a person.
On the playing field, that makes sense, right? That's clear to them.
Absolutely.
But in education, it's a different mindset.
Exactly. And so, but what's happening now is as education is shifting and really the foundations are cracking around us, I'm encouraging dads to now reclaim a role of leadership that they actually know and understand. And actually, you know, in some ways they're built for it, right?
Right. In some ways, I imagine even if there's an overwhelm or a sense of, oh God, that feels, you know, scarier. I don't know how. I also imagine there's a calling or kind of a longing somewhere inside to play that role.
Bingo. Bingo. And you talk to a lot of guys and you work with men and you know that purpose is actually the thing that drives.
Yeah.
It's not about accomplishment. It's about a larger purpose. And so this larger purpose is you have the chance, dads, to liberate your child.
Ooh,
where you don't. Yeah, well, I mean, it is. It's motivating. I mean, for those that are listening, I hope you could see me. I wish you could see me because I'm amped up right now when I think about this.
You could go check out the YouTube. On my YouTube channel, there's a video, so you'll be able to.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, there you go. You can see my bald head. Shined up this morning just for you.
Shined up just for you.
Yeah. So this is what we're looking at. And the thing that really bothers me is that nobody in education circles are talking about it. They're all talking about, we got to get back to normal. There is no normal.
Yeah.
Changed.
Right. And when there is no normal, it's an amazing opportunity to create something new. And it's also a time where people tend to stagnate. You know, there's like swirling around in an eddy until we get spit out. And often the getting spit out is not an easy part, an easy moment.
Right.
What's your sense of why dads aren't stepping up into this role?
Yes. So let me give you the history about it. So not forever. For the last 50 years, the role of parenting has been diminished in our society, right? It's been, again, mom's job to raise the kids. Yeah. Dad's job is to go and provide, right? That's been the logic and the language.
Bacon, they say.
Exactly. If you go back 200 years, the family operated as a single economy, a business, right? Everybody had a role to play and every role was absolutely essential. Wow. If one person didn't play their role, the whole family might starve to death. I mean, quite literally, right?
Yeah.
So for the last 50 years, we've been isolating moms, isolating kids, isolating dads in their individual roles.
Wow.
Now, again, I had a meeting actually before I got on the call here. Normally it's a face-to-face meeting. It's now gone virtual.
Mm-hmm.
I have meetings. Actually, I have a meeting tomorrow with people all over the Western Hemisphere. Those are meetings that can happen at any time and anywhere, right? And so what's happening is all of the assumptions around how education worked are falling away.
Mm-hmm.
So now this gap, this vacuum is going to pull people into it. Whether you want to or not, dad is going to get pulled in to this conversation. What do we do now because our child's not being prepared for the 21st century? That is a great question to start.
My God, that happened to us in the pandemic, right? It was like, okay, a lot of what was happening in school is not happening anymore. Mm-hmm. And do we want to just coast through the year and chalk it up to, all right, our kid's going to suffer, or do we want to actually take it into our own hands and create something new? And,
bingo. And once you do that, then you have to put on a different hat. You're no longer just a passenger, right? So back to more sports analogy. Yeah. I've worked with parents for 15 years. There are kind of 5 general groups of parents, but the head coach is the ideal. But then you also have parents that are kind of cheerleaders. Mm-hmm. They cheer, but they don't really do much.
They cheer, but they don't guide or lead.
They don't play any like real, critical role.
Yeah.
You have spectator parents as well. And so my job is to push parents to move all the way up that ladder until they are now the head coach. And to what you said this past year, when things fall apart, a parent has to choose now. Yeah. Am I going to engage or am I going to wait?
Yeah.
Well, if you engage now, then the next question is how? How do I engage?
Right, because I will say the thing that I was going to say is my life this year has been very challenging.
Yes.
And even yesterday, a friend of mine was over and she said, we were talking a little bit about it. And she said, it never was written that you would be the teacher and the parent of your child at the same time. Now, some people do choose that role. And what you're saying is actually we could choose it more, but
well, I mean, I would tweak the language that your friend said, right?
Yes.
No one really said the education game has to be played the way that the school has defined it.
Yes.
Right. That's the real issue. That's why, when I talked to parents this past year, probably 90% of the conversation was about reframing education. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. If education is school, mm-hmm. then if school is going online, then that means I need to take the same classes and I need to study for the same tests. No. Right. Things moved online. And everything is now changing. What are the critical pieces that a child needs to know? They need to know how to communicate.
Yeah.
And there's 3 types of communication that I would recommend, by the way.
Tell us.
Verbal,
mm-hmm.
written, mm-hmm. and visual communication. Those 3 things are superpowers. You know what I mean by visual communication?
No.
Canva, putting together videos, all of the ways to communicate an idea in a way that's just highly visual.
That's received. That's funny. We were working on a project and Ari created slides and it was like, full of text, the whole thing. And I said, okay, well, there's what you want to communicate and then there's how you want it to be received, right? You got to consider, are people going to be able to take in the information you want in this format?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so, and I've seen people, age of 12 who have mastered verbal communication, they've mastered visual communication, and they're actually really strong writers as well. Yeah, those kids now can start doing things.
They can do anything
online. They can start businesses.
Yeah.
Right at 12. And I know people who've done this. But again, if school is what education looks like, mm-hmm. then you don't have time to master some of those skills. Sales is another hugely valuable skill set that never gets the light of day in a typical classroom.
Yes.
Really, what I'm doing with you is sales. I'm trying to sell you on my way of thinking.
System, right? This way of thinking. Yeah. I think about back to being a pandemic, we started looking at, okay, what could Ari sell and what would that look like and how would it be creative and who would the money go to and, how would it be philanthropic? And that totally fell apart. But, the intention was there. And this is where you come in too, because without that guidance and trying to do it all on my own.
Yes.
That didn't materialize.
Yes. Well, it's hard, right? Yeah. And it's hard to switch in a kind of a rushed, pandemic environment where we're all uncomfortable. But, for the last 13 years, I've been doing this stuff before it became kind of fashionable. And there's a whole story about why we moved out of the traditional educational system, and it was trauma and all these sorts of things. But I learned how much you can learn online.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned how quickly a young person can take ownership of their own learning,
Yes.
which is when I say liberation, we're trying to liberate kids so that the parent doesn't have to shepherd them anymore. The
Very
child
well
is able
said.
to do it themselves.
I was watching your video on the inverse relationship between, right, that parents start out owning
Yes.
responsibility for their kids' relationship, but ideally the goal is, right, as parents decrease, the kid increases, and then and how schools tend to just take responsibility until they throw the kid out in the world, and then suddenly they're responsible and don't know what to do.
That's right. That's right. The school will enable a child to avoid taking responsibility and ownership of their own learning. Yeah. And that's a real problem. Yep. You also mentioned entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Like that is a skill. Mm-hmm. That requires someone who's able to learn from failure 1,000 times in a row.
God, that would be amazing. Like the school of entrepreneurs, for a child.
There are some that are popping up
in that context.
Yes, there are some that are popping up. They don't fit the normal model. And so the states don't support them. They have to be small, private kind of environments, but it's exactly what a child needs to be learning.
Yeah. Especially in this day and age.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I was talking again, I talk to people all over the world now, and the entrepreneurs I talk to, they say, entrepreneurship is not really that complicated. It's problem solving and considering value. That's all we're doing. We're problem solving.
And the rest of it is mindset and working with your mind and your own limitations.
Yes. And you have to deal with failure, right? Which again, if you think about a school, what's the worst thing you can have on a test is an F, right? You failed.
Yeah.
But in entrepreneurship environment, you actually take that failure and go, okay, what happened?
Yes.
And why did that not work? And I'm going to try it again, but I'm going to do a little something different next time. And
you can celebrate that failure and learn from it, as opposed to something's wrong here. Well, speaking of entrepreneurship, I know the working title for the book. I know you've got a couple books you're working on, but one of them I love, Alon's Kids and Yours, a Disruptive Education Playbook for Non-Billionaire Parents.
Yes.
That's brilliant. Right.
Yes.
And so that entrepreneurship model, I imagine, comes in there.
It does. Yeah. So most people don't realize that Elon Musk, love him or hate him, he's doing some things well. And one of the things is that he loves to learn, and he's raising his kids in this very unusual educational structure. It's not a school, technically. It's where it's more like a maker space. Uh-huh. He wants them to be curious, to know how to build things, to know how to problem solve. That is why, and he's able to do that because he's able to say, you know what, I'm going to do my own thing. Yeah. Right. And I'm going to do what's best for my kids regardless, because I got the money to do it.
Right.
Everyone else can do the same thing, except we have to be a little more strategic because we can't just throw money at the problem like he could. Yes. But the learning model is exactly the same. The child becoming the owner of their learning, the child deepening their curiosity, the child producing rather than consuming. And again, each kid needs someone who is playing the role of the head coach to say, okay, daughter, you look like you're interested, or you seem to like to build things. So we're going to now push you a little bit more in that direction. Mm-hmm. We're going to feed it, right?
Yes.
Son, you seem like you're really good at social activities. And so we're going to feed the social side of it. And we're going to start to figure out how you can take that social part. Maybe you start a podcast, right? Maybe you are an event planner. Maybe you are in sales, right? These are the ways that a head coach will look at their players and go, okay, that kid's got talent in this area. I'm going to feed that rather than what the school does, which is everybody play the same role. Everybody learn at the same work. Do the same work, et cetera. Yes.
I can't help but think of my relationship with my kid through all of this. And my kid at one point said, I want to build a bench. And so I was thinking, I looked for construction or carpentry camp. I found a carpentry camp this summer and, I'm on a wait list, but I thought, okay, if that doesn't happen, even though I don't have the skills, what an amazing project that would be for us together.
Bingo.
To go learn the skills and find a teacher or a mentor who can come in and guide us in that.
Well, I would even go further. I mean, he's 9.
Yeah.
Some of this is related to his own, how self-controlled and responsible he is. But at 9, I would argue you could buy him some power tools.
Yeah. And actually have him make the plan.
Yep. And we're going to go on YouTube. We're going to learn how to do it. We're going to call 2 people at the lumberyard and ask them what kind of wood. And we're going to call another person at a, I don't know, pick a makerspace and call them and say, I'm thinking about this. What do you think?
What do you
So
think?
you're now
What would you think?
teaching him how to solve his own problems. And he's going to now produce something on his own,
Wow.
completely different than an
So
educational environment.
exciting.
And I tell you what, that first bench, you won't want to sit on it
Right.
because it will collapse.
That's not going to be the point.
But take pictures of it because he's going to go, this is awesome, right?
Oh.
This bench I made is fantastic. And you look at it and it's leaning to the side and it's not even, but it doesn't matter because he built it.
Right.
He built it himself.
I think about that too as an entrepreneur. When I launch a new course or when I put something out there, doesn't always go the way I want it to go.
That's right.
But there are always these surprises along the way, and I always learn something, and I always make new connections. Right?
That's right.
It's such a beautiful process.
Yeah, and that's the process that we don't need to wait until that child is 25 to start.
Yes.
In fact, I would argue that we end up really injuring kids who know that they're capable between the ages of 13 and 22. They're capable of producing. They're capable of leading, but we treat them like we treated the 5 and 6-year-old, and they're not.
Oh, this is exciting.
Well, it's hard. And that's the other thing I want to be clear about. It's not easy.
Yeah.
It takes some fortitude.
Yeah. And exciting, right? I mean, and nothing that's meaningful is usually just easy.
That's right. Yeah. The quote, I don't know who said this, but anything that's of value costs. Mm-hmm. Right. So there's a cost to everything I'm describing here. And there's a risk to everything I'm describing here. But we know what we get in the traditional model. Yeah. And dads, talking to you now, you have seen kids who grow up and they're weak, not physically weak, emotionally, spiritually.
Perseverance.
Yes, they're weak. That's because we've never given them the time to practice, to lift the mental weights of failure, to lift the mental weights of sitting with a problem and not knowing what to do with it, and then trying something and it didn't work, and you try it again. That's weightlifting. But we tend not to allow our kids or encourage our kids to go to that space. And again, schools oftentimes enable that behavior by answering questions or giving kids a very tight space around which to operate. Yeah.
I love this. This is really powerful and exciting for, my own future and for the future of dads and kids everywhere. I know we could cover, for days, we could talk about this, but is there anything else that on this topic that we haven't covered that stands out to you?
Yeah, maybe before I got into this work, two things. One, I worked as a volunteer with Boys of Color for a number of years. Yeah. And, the normal logic around boys of color is that dads aren't around. And 90% of the kids that I interacted with, dads weren't around. Yeah. But when I interact with the dads, like you said, they actually they want to play a role, but they don't see themselves playing the old role of the nurturing. But they absolutely can see themselves. I can see themselves playing the role
being the coach
of the head coach. That's right. And we're going to practice failure today, right? We're going to intentionally do that. That's part of your development. And I'm going to help you do it, son, because it matters. So that's the first thing. And the second one, real briefly, is before I got into education, I was actually in healthcare. I ran outpatient medical practices at a large children's hospital here in Houston. And when a parent comes into a hospital, when their child is sick, they take on a personality that is powerful.
Yes.
Right? Because they're not going to
advocate for their child.
Yes, exactly. They're not going to let anybody touch their child or poke them or do anything until they understand exactly what's happening.
Yes.
In education, we've been led to believe that we should just drop the child off and walk back, and we shouldn't ask questions. And if we ask too many questions, we might be seen as pushy. No, the same consequences for a child that goes off course in education, same consequences as a child who goes off course in a hospital. It could be life or death.
Wow,
right?
That's big.
So the role of the parent is to re-engage in a way that says, I'm in charge, I am the head coach, and now I'm going to make sure that I choose the pathway that I want my children to follow. That's the mantra that I'm promoting.
Amazing. Thank you. So anything that you personally struggle with on this path that you think would be helpful for our listeners?
For dads, yeah. So dads, one of the main challenges, and this is maybe another conversation, but is aligning between dad and mom, right? We're different, And I think we're different on purpose. And of course, I'm using generalities.
Right. There's
here,
gender generalities here, but we could also talk about, the more masculine role or the more feminine role or the more nurturing role and the coach guiding role.
That's probably, thank you for better language, right? But the coaching role is one that sometimes conflicts with the nurturing role.
Right.
Both are important. And so the question is, how do you find enough balance where you're not nurturing to the point of what I call loving a child to death, which are moms that I see it all the time. Moms who have,
guilty of that sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's 9. I mean, if he's 25 and you're making his breakfast and you're tucking him in at night, yeah, we're probably
even before what you're saying, right? It's like, it starts here. And if I do the slow slide into from 9 to 25, there's got to be a point where you actually make that change.
That's right. And so there is where some of the coach language comes in. Because again, a coach would never say, okay, it's practice. Kids, go ahead and just hang out, do whatever you want. Right. I will make food. And there's an expectation of some activities, and some talk about it in terms of freedom and responsibility. If you're not responsible, then you really can't have freedom.
Ooh, freedom versus responsibility. That's a powerful.
Yeah. And the dad is usually the one, or the more masculine role is usually one that's insisting on the responsibility, and the more nurturing is more on the freedom side. We got to make sure there's alignment there. And that is a really difficult conversation for a lot of families, including myself, y'all. This is not something that I've mastered. My wife and I still have struggles around this same issue.
Is there anything you can say to a dad who's struggling with that with his wife or partner who is the more feminine one?
Yes, because I've also seen dads who are more on the nurturing side. So you got to have a third party. You got to have somebody in, and I don't know if you do this work, Shana, but someone who essentially is the referee, right?
Yes, I do that with some couples.
Yeah, it's not exactly therapy, but it's close.
Yeah, it's not exactly therapy, right? It is more of a coaching role in that way. And there are times where you go into those deeper issues because they show up on the surface in that comment or that misalignment or that doubting or things like that.
Right. But ultimately, here's what usually is the problem. There's not agreement on the vision.
Right.
So describe your child at age 25, like in detail, and not what they're doing. But describe who they are, right? Yes. Their character. Describe that. And now, if you and husband and wife agree that one of the things that my son or daughter is, they're going to be a really hard worker, right? Okay. Now we can start to think about what that looks like as a 9-year-old. So that means that maybe they are cooking their meal, right? Maybe they're cooking a meal a couple times a week.
Yeah. How do you back into that from 25 to 9 or 6 or however old your kids are?
Bingo. I want them to be about service. Okay. So at 9, that means we need to be thinking about what are the activities that can start building that skill set today. Right?
Yes. I'm laughing a little bit because sometimes I think about, okay, if I were to react this way, I would be encouraging my kid to be an asshole, at 25, 30, 45. If I were to react a different way, it might be a little bit harsher or a little bit more expecting responsibility, but then I'm helping create or guide who my kid will be in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And it's a tricky balance. The last one maybe I may mention is around negotiation. 9-year-old, he is far more mature and aware than most parents understand. I mean, I know my kids were. I only recognize that after the fact, by the way. So at 9, there should be negotiations around what does it look like?
That's good to know that there should be that, because there are many of those around here.
I'm sure. Yeah, but the negotiations, like, should I cook meals every day? What would be a fairer way to do this? Maybe are there things that you could do to help around the house? Otherwise the mom or the dad is, working all the time.
Like a slave.
And the child is hanging out, enjoying themselves, playing games, etc.
Yes.
You can have that negotiation with the child.
Yes. So I just caught myself saying, that was actually horrible language, whether we cut that out or not, to use this.
I didn't even hear what you said.
I said like a slave. And that's actually an awful reference.
Well, listen, I think we need to remove emotion from some language, right? Because some of the language I've used about slavery is this: for parents who send their child to a school and they don't have options to send them someplace else or to do something else, then that means they can't negotiate. And if they can't negotiate, then they are a slave. And so as it relates to your child, if you're not going to allow your child to negotiate, then yeah, they're very much slave-like. They do what you say, whether they want to or not. And they never learn the skills to decide for themselves. That's not what we're about. So I would leave it in, and I would lead into that, because that language is important and it matters.
Yeah. What I appreciate about your work that I've seen, right, is that it is controversial, and you are stirring, you're a shit stirrer in a way, and strong, right? And you're standing for something. You're standing for this vision that most of us, like you said, I love how you went back and said, a lot of times the disagreement comes from not aligning on a vision. Not, when I work with couples or even people as they're wanting to be in a relationship, and I say, I know this is going to sound weird, but it's really powerful every year or every quarter to really look at, what do we want this relationship to be? Why are we in it in the first place?
That's so huge. And that is exactly the conversation that should happen with your kid every quarter, every month, because kids, particularly younger kids, are changing so quickly.
So fast.
Yeah. So this is the opportunity that has presented itself in large measure because of COVID, and a recognition now that learning has just broken out of the school and it's never going to go back. Yeah. And now the question for families is, what do we do about it? And I want to help families navigate that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this really incredible conversation, necessary conversation. Where can people find you?
Yeah, well, you can go to theeducationgame.com, and that's where I live and breathe. And I'm also very active on LinkedIn, Matthew C. Barnes.
Yes, great LinkedIn. Posting there. I highly recommend checking those out.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure. Great to talk to you.
And for your work in the world.
Thank you. We'll talk more later.
I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and it gave you something to consider and explore in your life. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 to get a sense of how you can become a better lover and leader. You'll start to see how you can be both more respected and desired in your unique and genuine way. If you don't feel as confident or as excited about life or love as you'd like to be, this quiz is a really great starting point and will guide you toward a more passionate love life and a more inspiring and successful career. So again, text ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 or head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.